Hello everyone, and welcome to this particular event on what is the future of STEM digital education. My name is James Harland. I'm the Associate Dean for Student Experience in the School of Science here at RMIT, and it's my pleasure to be your MC for the event this afternoon. Without further ado, let me introduce my colleague, Professor Margaret Jollins, who's the Associate Dean for Student Experience in the School of Engineering here at RMIT, as well as a long-time and highly respected colleague. Margaret's going to open our particular event, as well as to perform the acknowledgement of country. So you can see before you now, here's our particular program. I think the only thing I'd like to draw to your attention is that when you're asking questions, and please do ask questions as soon as you like in the event, it would be helpful if you can introduce any reference to a presenter's name in capital letters at the start of your question. However, without further ado, Margaret, over to you.
Thanks, James. Hi, everyone. I'm Margaret Jollins. It's my pleasure to formally open the event and welcome you here today. This event brings together three of our future-thinking RMIT practitioners from our College of Science, Engineering and Health to showcase how they use digital tools to promote student learning in their courses. We also have an amazing panel of national and international speakers to share their vision of the future of STEM education, as well as our own Professor Alex Subik, Deputy Vice-Chancellor of College of Science, Engineering and Health and Vice President, Digital Innovation. I do hope you find this event stimulating and interesting. I'm sure I will. But before I start, I would like to recognise the traditional custodians of Australia in an acknowledgement of country. For our international visitors, before white settlement, there were perhaps as many as 400 language groups in Australia. But as we gather virtually today from across all areas of Australia, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which each of all the Australians here today are living and working. I would like to acknowledge the Woiwurrung and the Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation, on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of the university. RMIT University respectfully acknowledges their ancestors and elders past and present. RMIT also acknowledges the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where we conduct our business. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. I think I'm going to give back to James.
Thank you, Margaret. Yeah. Thank you for that acknowledgement of country. I think it's one thing that's always important when we're talking about trends and technology to pay respects to the world's oldest living culture that's been here for 50, 60,000 years plus, which often gives a great perspective to the work we're doing here. Next up, as Margaret mentioned, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Alex Subik, who is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor in our College of Science Science, Engineering and Health at RMIT, as well as Vice President of Digital Innovation. Quite a long title, but that means there's quite a lot to live up to. Now, Alex has been a key instigator in the development of this particular event, as well as a strong advocate for innovation, particularly in STEM education. So, Alex, we're looking very much forward to hearing your thoughts on the future of STEM. Alex, over to you.
Thank you so much, James, and thank you, Margaret. Thanks to the whole team on this initiative. Wonderful initiative, quite timely, and my personal welcome to all the speakers, local and international, to this wonderful event. It is quite timely because we have seen, even through COVID-19 and prior to COVID-19, through our, bushfire disasters over the summer, 2019-2020 summer, those few months have underscored the importance and value of an educated and prepared STEM workforce in developing solutions for response, for recovery and long-term resilience. But we all know, however, that expertise does not develop overnight. And we know that the future holds many new challenges, especially as we have globally, as well as the Australian society and industry embarked on the fourth industrial revolution. And the fourth industrial revolution carries new challenges and new opportunities in which STEM qualified workforce will play a key role. I'll reflect within my 5 minutes, my modest 5 minutes in today's event as an opening. I'll reflect with few remarks that hopefully will spark some further thinking and conversation at the event and following the event. We've seen some of the most innovative economies driving the fourth industrial revolution, such as West Coast US, such as Germany. And that drive, at the heart of that drive, is basically STEM. We've recognized STEM as the key driver of economic growth to technology innovation through scientific discovery and innovation and translation. Australians who have studied science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are helping to solve problems for the future. They're meeting electricity demands and generation needs. They're investigating new hydrogen generation technologies, adapting to the changing climate. They're integrating AI, not only in industry, but also in society. They're optimizing healthcare for aging populations, as well as developing telemedicine, digital health solutions during COVID, which will play a major role post-COVID as well. In Australia, there's about 11 million people in the workforce, of which about 2 million are STEM qualified, which means that our economy and our society are very much dependent on the quality of the STEM qualified workforce. But the future is going to look quite differently. And we know that many jobs are changing, many industry sectors are changing, some jobs are even disappearing, including in university sector qualified STEM qualifications and non-STEM qualifications. And we need to keep an eye on what that future will bring and how that transformation is happening. We know that the nature of work and careers are changing fast. And in the future, many reports, such as the World Economic Reports, Forum reports, are showing that skills will be prized over academic qualifications alone. What does that mean at university setting? When we think about university STEM qualifications, where we're saying that skills might be more of a focus and prized more by employers than just university degree qualifications. That is some food for thought. The COVID-19 slowdown has offered employers an opportunity to reshape their hiring practices around this shifting paradigm. And we're already seeing that many employers, global as well as local, are looking at skills in a different way and work readiness in a different ways. So skills, not degrees, will shape the future of work, if I can be controversial. The highest demand skills in many reviews, in many surveys, are shown to be across professional clusters that will be both technical and cross-functional. But what we are seeing is that whatever STEM qualification we are focusing on, or whatever STEM profession we are focusing on, across science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and medical, there are a couple of emerging trends that all of them will have to address in a more substantive way in STEM. One is around digital skills, and one is around human factors. And they are driving the growth in professions of the future. So whereby all STEM qualified professionals will have to have a much higher level of digital literacy or digital capability or digital skills, as well as much higher levels of human factors and being able to place their profession and STEM capabilities or disciplinary capabilities in a much more broader, human societal systems context than perhaps before. We are also seeing emerging new professions that are going to be finding place in many sectors, not just typical sectors that we're used to seeing before. Some of the new professions that are emerging that are reported already globally as growth sector professions are, such as the artificial intelligence specialist, or cybersecurity specialist, or managers in those areas, that are required to have technical skills as well as cross-functional skills, full stack engineers or life cycle engineers or systems engineers, which are no more focused on an individual discipline, but are basically working beyond borders, across disciplines, and so on. In medical and health professions, we are seeing digital health and personalized health and personalized medicine, emerging as areas of the future with a drive in the change of work and change of professions in these areas. A lot to grasp and to reshape and prepare for the future. But we are also struggling with some endemic issues in STEM around diversity and inclusion. For example, in Australia, of all the STEM qualified professionals, only 22% of STEM qualified women are in managerial roles, 78% are men. We're also seeing that of there are about 5.2% of non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander adults in Australia who have a university STEM qualification, compared to 0.5% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander adults with university STEM qualifications. So diversity and inclusion in the broader sense is also one of the issues we need to address. So if I need to summarize my 5 minutes into some of the issues we need to tackle, they are the issues that we are basically capturing at RMIT in our new STEM strategy that will be captured hopefully within our new STEM college that aims to reflect a much more comprehensive and strategic approach to STEM education and to STEM development, for the betterment of the society and industry. And they are around, that cross-functional skills, interdisciplinary skills across STEM, sharing of common platforms of knowledge and skills across all STEM programs, and knowing what they are in terms of their essential value for future work. Developing much higher levels of digital skills and human factor skills across all STEM programs, and embedding diversity and inclusion and innovation at the heart of what we do in STEM education development. They are major challenges, but they have to be tackled by design. They can't be tackled by pilot projects, pilot programs, because that will never get us the scale and the pace of change we need. And what we are discussing today is about developing the workforce of the future. In many cases, grounded in STEM capabilities, but for jobs that we don't even know. It is interesting to develop the workforce of the future for jobs of the future that we don't even know, and that will be emerging at much more rapid pace than before, because technology advancements today are measured in months, not in decades, as we've seen in the past. I'll stop here, James, and I really look forward to the talks and the panel discussions during this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, there's certainly a lot to take in there, and certainly thank you for those remarks that certainly set us off very well, I think. Next up, it's my pleasure to introduce another long-time colleague of mine, Professor Mark Sanderson, who's the Director of the Information and Systems Engineering, close brackets, ECP here at RMIT. And I think the initial spark for this event came from a conversation that Mark had with Margaret and I. So it's very fitting to have Mark here today to talk to us as well about the role of ECP. So Mark, over to you.
Thanks, James. Let me just start by perhaps explaining what ECPs are. These are enabling capability platforms that RMIT has created, and there are 8 which cover the whole of academic study, and the role of a director is to understand the research activities that are going on across the university, and at the same time facilitate interactions and initiations of new interdisciplinary work. And you'll see on the next slide that what we're doing this year is starting 5 restart initiatives, which cover different areas of interdisciplinary work that we think are important in this post-COVID era. And we've also been making sure that these restart initiatives focus on the UN Sustainability Development Goals. If we could move to the next slide, you'll see that, for example, the kinds of activities that we do, we try to engage with the full range of activities that you see at RMIT. So it might be working with some of the existing networks that we have funded through the ECPs. It might be through working with some of the research centres that, for example, the colleges have created, or it might be something in between. We're working with some of the initiatives, a little bit like what we're doing with James and Margaret here. A conversation led to a discussion led to this event. And you'll see on the next slide that in terms of the digital restart, there's a range of different activities that we focus on, including topics such as cybersecurity, digital futures and social innovation. In fact, connections between cybersecurity and digital futures, I think, will be an interesting one, as well as digitally connected health systems. And the last slide from me, which is just an advert for the next restart that we're going to be doing within the digital start, which is related to health. And you'll also see here on the bottom that we've got a link to the to the Restart webpage, which we just launched yesterday. So www.rmit.edu.au/restart if you want to find out more about the Restart events that we're doing. And if anyone from RMIT is online and interested in doing something like we've done for James and Margaret, please do get in touch. We're very interested in facilitating events like this, and we've been channeling a lot of the R&I capabilities and staff to help people get things like this going. So James, I'm going to hand back to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. And look, I must say that from Margaret's and my point of view, this has been a marvellous enterprise, thanks largely to the support from Mark and Michelle and others behind the scenes, as it were. So it's been remarkably easy to do this event from our perspective. Next up, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jess Danaher, who's a lecturer in nutrition in the School of Science here at RMIT, and she's going to talk to us about enhancing the students' experience online. So Jess, over to you.
Thank you, James. Now, before I get stuck into some of my top tips for enhancing the student experience online, I really want to emphasize that these are just some tips. I have a load more and I could speak about this topic for another hour if permitted. But for the purposes of this presentation, I've selected my top few tips to focus on that are really about enhancing your moments with students, making them more meaningful, as well as my favorite efficiency hack. Next slide, please. Let's start with the lecture content. So I'm sure many of you by now have heard of lecture chunking. It's a process of cutting down your lectures into small pre-recorded bites that are easier for students to digest. And there are many online platforms that you can use to do this. Now, even before COVID times, I have been using pre-recorded lecture chunks in my course on food toxicology and allergens. But this year I did it for everyone. I did it for my nutrition courses too. This year so far, I've taught four cohorts and about 235 students living across 4 continents. And for my students, some of the benefits to lecture chunking include enhanced ability to retain concentration, greater flexibility with their workload, easier content navigation, and easier revision. For us educators, this model of content delivery also reduces the stress of live streaming, whilst also freeing up our time for more meaningful activities with students. And that's what they want. If you think that most students would like to be spoken at by you as a lecturer for 1 to 2 hours in a live setting, then you have absolute tickets on yourself. That is not what the majority want at all. My tips for making these is to make them podcast friendly where possible. So any slides used for content just reinforces the message, but they don't need to be seen. If students can engage in this without having to sit in a stationary position or staring at a screen, then that's even better for flexible learning. Now, moving on to the next slide. Year to year, I update my content to make sure that it has the latest evidence and the latest stats to back it up. But I do this in a savvy way. I do it by changing my existing content using editing software. And there are heaps you can choose from. I encourage you to have a play around with these and you'll pick up in no time. Now, I do this because I'm a busy human, but I also don't believe that re-recording an entire lecture chunk is necessarily always going to be the best use of my time. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's faster to re-record the whole chunk, especially when I have a lot to change, but that's not always the case. Other times, for example, in my lectures on hypertension, it's faster for me to update the annual content by editing because the anatomy of the heart does not change. The pathophysiology underlying hypertension does not change. The nutrition recommendations and evidence might need some updates every few years, but annually the stats change. So I edit in those stats annually. I do not need to re-record all of those things that don't change. That's just not a good use of my time. I'm all about recycling existing lecture content where possible, but not letting it sound like old material. You need to keep it fresh, keep it current, and do it in a time-savvy way. So here you can see that I free up my time where I've saved time from pre-recording lectures and editing in changes to use my time more meaningfully with students. So all of my timetabled lecture slots have been repurposed. When we're on campus, I use this time for interactive activities, team-based tasks, hands-on experience, and gamified learning. Now, admittedly, my intentions here are a little bit selfish. I do this because I want to have a fun time, but the students love it too, so it's a real win-win. Now, online this year, it's looked a little bit different. For me, I've maintained what I could in that online environment, but I've also included a schedule for fortnightly short team-based catch-ups with students where I check in on about 3 or 4 of them at a time, mics on, cameras on, just having a chat about where they're going with their assignments and how they're at with the COVID situation. This year, that's helped me really humanise that online learning experience. I could show students that I cared about their well-being as well as their progression. And I use their names. It's literally on the screen, so using those little things go a long way. In the next slide, you'll see that these tips and more have resulted in average good teaching scores and overall satisfaction scores of about 95%, and that's across all of the courses that I teach. As well as some really positive qualitative feedback. That speech bubble there shows the size of the word based on how often they were used in the course evaluation surveys this year. And I must say, I'm pretty proud to be dubbed as organised, particularly in a semester where we transferred from on campus to online in a week. I hope these tips can help you achieve the same outcomes with your course. Thank you for listening, and back to you, James.
Thank you, Jess. And as you promised, smack on 5 minutes to the dot. So well done. Thank you, Jess. Much appreciated. Our next speaker is from the School of Engineering. We have very pleased to have with us Dr. Nick Bardell, who's a senior lecturer in aerospace engineering and aviation, and with a rather fascinating title of the talk being Understanding Airline Service Quality. So Nick, over to you.
Thank you, James. My presentation today is from a first-year undergraduate class in Aviation Quality Systems. Now, this was a new lecture for 2020 and originally intended as a face-to-face in-class activity, but its adaptation to the online environment went remarkably well, as I hope we can demonstrate. Next slide, please. Airline service quality is very difficult to quantify and measure because, as you'll appreciate, it depends upon perceptions and expectations of passengers. Now, there are 5 dimensions: reliability, responsiveness, assurance, empathy, and tangibles that actually give the best indication of the level of airline service quality. So my challenge was devising an activity that would really reinforce the concepts that we discussed in the first part of the lecture, and then capture the student interest using contemporary technology and get them to think collaboratively, brainstorm, and basically develop a number of professional skills in this particular area. Next slide, please. So the way I handled this in the online environment was to split the class into 5 groups using Collaborate Ultra's breakout rooms. And each group was then assigned 1 dimension of airline service quality to investigate. Each group was then asked to look at their specified area of service quality and agree on the 3 top attributes that they thought customers would expect. To summarise their findings, they were then asked to make a short video using the application Flipgrid. Now, all of this took place within 40 minutes. I then returned the group to the main classroom and got them to review all 5 videos so that every group could see everybody else's take on airline service quality. And finally, the students were asked to vote on the best video based on its content and presentation. So the activity went really well. The students engaged very enthusiastically, and I was able to visit their breakout rooms and actually guide their thinking in real time. They all made good videos, some better than others, and this really developed their creative skills and their presentation skills. And of course, when the students watched the final presentations, they were able to see other people's work in a format and a language that was familiar and interesting to them. They then voted, which added an element of excitement and motivation, and a packet of Tim Tams, which of course in the digital environment are totally calorie free, was the carrot I dangled in front of them to get them to actually produce the best video. I would like to show you now the winning video. So perhaps Sarah, if you could get this loaded, that would be fantastic.
Cleanliness is important for airlines as it's important for the plane to be clean before the passengers arrive on it. This can be done through cleaning between flights as well as after and before flights, as well as the team on board the plane continuously cleaning during the flight. As well as this, a clean terminal is also important as it's the first and last impression on the passenger. Seat comfort's important as customers will be spending most of their time sitting during the flight. So a seat that isn't damaged, the cushions are all intact, as well as has optimal legroom, allows the passengers to relax and improves the service quality of the flight. Modern aircraft type is important for customers. Some customers choose to only fly modern aircraft, and this could be for a low-cost airline, A320 or 737, as these have been proven and ensure a level of safety as well as comfort. Making sure that all the aircraft are up to date and maintaining that consistently across the airline is important in maintaining a view of quality in the airline.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. So as you'll see, that video was put together probably within 15 to 20 minutes maximum after the group had discussed all the criteria they felt were important. So the student feedback from this was very positive. They really enjoyed doing something practical, and they felt that this really helped to cement the concepts and ideas that I had delivered in class at the beginning of the lecture. Having seen how well this went, I'm certainly going to introduce similar exercises into 2 of my other courses, and I believe it will do great things to actually enhance the learning experience of students in an online environment. Last slide, please, Sarah. So in summarising the learning outcomes here, the students developed a much greater familiarity and understanding of the concepts of airline service quality and how it can be measured and assessed. And they developed a whole host of professional skills based around teamwork, brainstorming, making a video, using their computer skills, and generally negotiating, evaluating and ranking. So I felt that this was a very successful undertaking, and I must acknowledge the help given by Sarah Eagle and Lisa Curran from our teaching and learning team, who actually did all the hard yakka behind this and made it such a success. So thank you, James. Over to you.
Thank you, Nick. Fascinating stuff, and I'm sure you'll find it transfers well to lots of other classes by the sound of it. Next, it's my pleasure to also introduce Sophie Zenos, who's the Associate Professor and Discipline Leader in Psychology in the School of Health and Biomedical Sciences. And Sophie and a group of her colleagues have got something very interesting to tell us about listening to our learners, highlights of the mental health webinar initiative in psychology and education. So Sophie, over to you.
Thank you, James. Yep, I just would like to say that this initiative developed following an invitation by Professor Magdalena Plavansky, so I'm very, very grateful to Magdalena. It developed as part of the COVID-19 Healthy Restart Initiative. Now, I don't know what you all think of webinars, but I'd like to talk you through how this webinar initiative works for us. So over to the next slide. What I'll do very briefly is talk you through just a little bit about the Students as Partners model, which was the theoretical underpinning of this initiative, and then how we came to develop the webinar initiative and the outcomes to date of this initiative, and also some strengths and some challenges that we've had. So I'll talk you through very briefly some of that. Guys, the student-led curriculum and assessment is certainly not a new concept at all, but the increased attention on career readiness has sparked a renewed interest in initiatives which ensure that students possess a myriad of skills and knowledge beyond academic coursework. Their skills and knowledge thought to be necessary for success in the workplace. And certainly the increased recognition of the importance of STEM in careers of the future certainly adds further weighting to the importance of involving students in shaping their experience and using technology to enhance this learning in the digital domain. So what does this Students and Partners initiative look like? It's basically where students and staff collaborate to co-design and deliver projects to enhance the student experience. And that can range from gathering feedback and then suggesting improvements to designing and developing new projects or curriculum. And why adopt this approach? Well, there really is a subtle but extremely important difference between a university that listens to students and responds accordingly and an institution that actually gives students opportunities to explore areas that they believe to be significant and to recommend solutions to bring about change. So the key take-home message, I guess, is that we really should be actively engaging students in not only their own learning, but also assessment, because it has considerable benefits for those 21st century skills that we want to nurture and develop in all our students. So as you'll see from the next slide, the key task what we were tasked with was to develop resources to support student mental health, particularly as a result of COVID. That's that initiative that developed as part of Magdalena's team, and that's what we were tasked with, to develop resources to support student mental health. But alongside that, we also thought about some other key things that we think students need to learn. So aside from content knowledge, for example, we know that the clinical psychology master's students are experts in content knowledge on mental health, and the education master's students are experts on educational principles. But we also wanted to use this opportunity to think about some really important 21st century skills to help facilitate students' career readiness. Earlier in the talk, Professor Zubik alluded to the importance of both digital skills and human factors. And interestingly, I believe this initiative actually incorporates aspects of both. So, for example, we wanted to think about how we can nurture our students to be able to deliver some simple, effective, meaningful information to groups of people with impact in an online space. We wanted to think about the digital literacy skills, important webinar development skills, how best they can convey important information in an interactive way as experts in an online domain. So what was the outcome? Students and staff from 2 schools, from psychology, from health and biomedical sciences, and from education, work collaboratively to design 3 interactive 20-minute webinars to support student mental health. And these webinars are being developed by students, for students. Again, very much the power of the student voice. It's also fortuitous that we've collaborated with the RMIT Health and Wellbeing team to enable these final products, these interactive webinars, to be made available to thousands of RMIT students via the RMIT Together Facebook space. So that's an online space created for students to connect. So these webinars created by students for students will then be made available in that Facebook space. And these are the 3 topics you can see there: enhancing positive wellbeing, managing isolation and loneliness, and social media. And you. So those topics were determined by the students in consultation with us as staff, but the students were very, very keen on those particular topics. Okay, so what we've developed is an approach to support students across disciplines to identify these key themes that are meaningful for them, to work in teams, to work collaboratively, to reflect on the process of working collaboratively. The student feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. Students are really motivated to engage in this task. They see it as a wonderful opportunity for creativity and to showcase skill sets beyond content knowledge. And also, this has real-world application. These webinars will be then made available to thousands of other students. So the students love that concept of helping other students. The challenges, again, as staff, we're needing to ensure that we support staff to working with their groups collaboratively as each group finds their own style. So just ensuring that as staff we support the students with their group membership, making sure there's a shared storage space, and also encouraging students to be aware of the strengths of each discipline. So working collaboratively and understanding each of the disciplines. This is certainly an initiative that I am really keen to continue over the next few semesters. And now, James, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Fascinating stuff as usual. It is now my pleasure to introduce the first of our external speakers, or external to RMIT. The first of these is Rita Arrigo, who's an industry digital strategist. Fascinating title that in itself at Microsoft. Equally fascinating title, Rita is going to talk to us about an immersive, lifelong AI-enabled experience. So Rita, over to you.
Thanks, James. Thanks for the intro, and I'm super excited to be sharing with you my view of the future of digital education, supported by the work I've been doing at Microsoft. And I thought you'd be fascinated here. This is my little avatar that I use when I enter my alt space worlds, and I'll talk to you a little bit about those kind of environments as well. So here we go. Some of the global trends that are occurring in the world around education and have been identified by the World Economic Forum are really focused on this idea that it's lifelong learning that we're going to be doing, like not just one degree and changing multiple careers and continually coming back, as well as, you know, really building on this 21st century curriculum and focusing on specialist education and focusing on education innovation. And how do we get there? How do we go and support these global trends? So at Microsoft, we have a bit of a framework that addresses some of these initiatives, and I'm going to show you that framework next. The framework is around being able to provide secure and connected campuses. This whole idea of student success around not just the student retention, completion, alumni, as well as recruitment, teaching and learning, having a whole lot of different tools available to make teaching and learning a lot more exciting, as well as really focusing on the academic research and ways that we can collaborate better and start to tap into some of those high performance computing and AI. And it's exciting to have Mark on the call, so I know he's done a bit of work with these kind of platforms as well. But let's talk a little bit about the platform that on the next slide, that we have put in place and that a lot of people are using. RMIT has invested in Microsoft 365. We're currently using Teams at the moment, but it has a platform that allows you to build on a lot of the collaboration. And I'm really excited that later on David Kellerman is going to show you some of those collaborations he's built. Things like being able to have you know, bots to answer questions rather than lecturers having to spend time individually answer each question, so the students can actually get a response to their questions much faster. Better collaboration between the students, and you'll see some of that when you step in. But it's a whole development platform which really allows you to take the experience to the next level. I just wanted to share three highlights of what's been going on in the world on the next slide. And just fascinatingly, I often tell this story about the fact that there's currently 80 million users worldwide using Teams for education. So there's a lot of innovation going on in that space. Just around the corner, we have Xavier, who's been really tapping into the whole design lab and to create design labs, and they were able to achieve that within 6 weeks. In Japan, we've had graduation ceremonies actually occur on Teams so that they could create that interactive kind of fun experience. And in Brazil, we've really seen this huge participation, a record student participation versus in-person attendance. So it's really starting to show that, you know, even though we have these amazing campuses, people do want to learn from home as well. So on the next slide, I'm just going to share with you a little bit about what's happening with our platform. So we're really investing in Together Mode, which is this new type of AI that allows you to not just have all the squares, but also be able to place your participants in a choice of spaces, from atriums to theatres to kitchens. And we're really finding that this is really improving the fatigue that you get from video, and helping people to feel more at home when they can all see each other in these scenes. We're also bringing out the breakout rooms so that you can have your breakouts, and meditation, which is kind of really interesting. And it was really exciting to have Sophia talk about mental health. And, you know, this is really important part of what we're doing with teams as well. On the next slide, I'll talk to you a little bit about some of the work we've been doing in thinking about, you know, how do we go to the next step? How do we create these immersive environments? And this is actually Altspace that you see on the screen. As you can see, you enter as an avatar, and there's avatars everywhere you go, and you're able to send emotions, etc., and enter these spaces. But if you go to the next screen, I'll talk a little bit about the features. So it's really great for TED Talks, for the ability to be able to moderate Q&A, to bring in other types of metrics and have this lock stage. But I think I was lucky enough to attend the Mixed Reality Developers Conference in Altspace, and what was really exciting about it was that you could walk around exhibitions. It kind of brought back that serendipity that you get from events, because you could bump into other people as you were an avatar, and you could really express yourself with these emojis and hand raising, which sometimes you don't have the ability in live events. So that's a little bit about Altspace. Let's talk on the next slide about Minecraft. Really big all over the world, but in particular, Victorian schools have really been embracing it to kind of help kids to build friendships in this more digital world, as well as take, you know, new ways to teach traditional topics. Like one of the examples was they had like a bridge, and they were teaching bridge design, and the kids were building the bridges. And this has got some exciting innovation, and I'm going to share with you what RMIT is doing with that. So I've been working really closely with Dr. Fabio Zambetta. He's got, was very successful at launching one of the world's first mixed reality course, and that's been operating since 2018, as well as doing a mixed reality hack. And that was super exciting to see students actually use some of the technology around these more immersive techniques. And you know, one of the hacks they came up with amazingly was virtual chemistry, which, you know, now has become a true reality, where, you know, students need to be able to do that and have these virtual pracs. But some of the work that Fabio is launching next year is around using Minecraft with a Pi edition, where you take a Raspberry Pi as a vehicle for experimentation and really start to develop those hands-on learning. And really exciting for being able to take it to teachers, hackers, and makers. So I find it amazing that RMIT is so lucky to have these kind of new innovations happening in this space. Other trends are around secure learning platforms, multimodal, this whole idea of personalised learning experiences, and Fabio really tapped into that with his adaptive platform. These micro-credentials, which I can really see as real as part of that lifelong learning experience, the ability to have data-informed decision-making, and really stepping into those collaborative innovations. On the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing as Microsoft throughout people tapping into these. So lots of these student groups, student-led conversations to kind of create that virtual club experience. Altspace, so we've got the Imperial College using it as a student meet and greet. Minecraft, we also had a graduation in Minecraft, and Berkeley has actually created its whole canvas in Minecraft. Minecraft is also launching a whole lot of chemistry features so that you can create these virtual experiences. And one of the things that I found really exciting, having a daughter that studies at RMIT in environmental science, is taking some of our AI project, like a project that we have, which FarmBeats, which uses IoT sensors in the environment, and we're pre-packaging that to allow lecturers to be able to set them up and have students actually go in and do the data analysis on that. And I think that stuff's amazing, as it makes it so much easier to create these courses and these curriculum. So I just wanted to highlight this very exciting thing at the beginning of COVID. Cape Western Reserve University really didn't want to stop teaching anatomy, and they actually shipped 185 HoloLenses to first-year medicine students, and the reaction was incredible, with lecturers being able to come into their rooms and being able to see anatomy objects and continue to learn in these really immersive ways. So that's about it. I'd like to thank you, and stay connected with me. Follow me on LinkedIn. I'm always talking about kind of happenings in the education space, and I'm really looking forward to seeing David Kellerman show us some of this in real life.
Thank you, Rita. Sort of fascinating stuff, and as usual, it always feels like talking to you is like getting a tour of Aladdin's cave, which is great to hear all these wonderful toys we can play with. So thank you. Next up, we have Robert Morcillo from Telstra. Now, Robert has this another fascinating title, Digital Inclusion Senior Specialist. I hope you hear what that's about. That's fascinating in its own right, I think. Even more fascinating is the title of the talk of Digital Plus Minus Times Divide to the Power of, I think is the way to pronounce that. But Robert, over to you. We'd like to hear your explanation of that title, if nothing else.
Thanks very much, James, and happy to do that. If you just look at the slide, the outline, yeah, next slide. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this part of the country, the Wurundjeri people of Kulin Nations, and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. Pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'm just also pleased to acknowledge that Telstra and RMIT University have an MOU to enhance student learning through placements and work integrated experiences, and that's really good. And just to note that we do work closely with RMIT and Centre for Social Innovation Swinburne on the Digital Inclusion Index. The title of my brief presentation is meant to infer that digital has its pluses and minuses, its multipliers and its divides and its exponents, but I'm focusing mainly on the divide part of the equation. And I guess if everybody else here has their foot on the accelerator, perhaps this is just a bit of a tap on the brake, just to talk about digital inclusion or digital exclusion across COVID-19 impacts, the unfinished business, and what Telstra is sort of trying to do, and a few comments finally. Next slide, thanks very much. So in terms of COVID-19 impacts, many telcos stepped up to offer extra short-term capacity and relief. Just speaking about our own contribution, you know, we gave extra mobile data inclusions, unlimited home broadband data inclusions, discounts for job seeker recipients, unlimited callings for seniors, a pause on disconnections, bill assistance, all, you know, a whole range of things in the education space as well. And we figure in those 4 months from March to June, we assisted about 2.6 million customers in terms of getting through that first COVID period. NBN Co also came to the party and provided a relief package, which allowed us to offer a reduced priced home broadband service. The network and infrastructure has generally coped well. We target a 99.995 core network availability, and that works out at less than 3 minutes downtime in a year. However, people might have noticed that the edge reliability in the technology is sometimes less predictable. So, however, severe customer service disruptions, longer delays in activations and assurance, variable customer experience in technology and network reliability, and people may have noticed that upload speeds actually become much more critical in terms of video conferencing, cloud applications and so on. And of course, there are a range of differences with the technologies that people are connected with. The extra data demands becoming the new normal, and yet I have to point out that the NBN cost relief is still slated as temporary and probably finishing in November. And RSPs like Telstra are caught in the middle of wholesale costs and retail willingness to pay. And then we've got the general economic situation coming along where a lot more unemployment and so on is likely to impact access and affordability. Next slide. I call digital inclusion in Australia unfinished business. I don't know from where you sit and where you see it, and perhaps with students and so on, you see them having all the latest and the Apples and the Samsungs and the Dells and so on. But from where we sit, 2.5 million Australians still remain offline. And for example, as recent as July 2020, a couple of months ago, the Tasmanian Premier's Economics and Social Recovery Advisory Council, this is in Tasmania, noted that 17% of Tasmanian households do not have access to the internet. And in some regions, this is as high as 32%. NBN currently quote the figure of 75% household take-up, and that includes voice-only customers. So there's 25% of households not connected to the NBN at this point in time. So the gaps between digitally included and excluded are quite substantial. A range of groups, people in low-income households, mobile-only users, people aged 65 plus, people who did not complete secondary school have quite low scores compared to the Australian average. Mobile-only users, 4 million Australians, less digitally included, they use it less, they pay more for it in terms of data, and their skills and capabilities are less. Affordability remains a very key challenge, particularly for those on fixed incomes. Building confidence, you know, the whole issue of scams and phishing and all that sort of stuff, you know, turns people off, and data breaches, all that sort of thing. So with NBN nearing completion, we've got access with a big tick, but affordability and digital ability remain critical areas for attention. Next slide. So this just shows graphically digital inclusion tracks socioeconomic contours. So you can see there with income, as it goes, income goes down, digital inclusion goes down remarkably, employment as well, education, age as well. So it's clear that digital inclusion tracks socioeconomic contours. Next slide. And interestingly, the income gap. So we track the income gap. This is between the highest quintile and the lowest quintile. That gap has not changed. And so over the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years that we've been tracking the Digital Inclusion Index, that gap has remained the same. And that's a real worry, particularly for people who are on lower incomes, fixed incomes. Next slide, thanks. Digital inclusion across education. So education makes a big difference in access. If you've got a tertiary education, you're above the Australian average. If you've got secondary or less, you're way below the Australian average in terms of access, and affordability and ability follows the same contours. Next slide, thanks. In the report that we're going to publish with the Australian Digital Inclusion Index 2020, which is coming out on the 22nd of October, we do a deep dive on low-income families with school-aged children. 4 million primary and secondary students in Australia, of which 20% or 800,000 are from households in that lowest income bracket, and they score very significantly lower. The issue there is that COVID-19, lack of access to technology options and suitable devices, paying more of their income, roughly 5% of a household income in terms of telecoms, creates significant challenges for adapting to an online learning environment. And when students from lower socioeconomic families fall behind at any point, we know that they are less likely than others to catch up again. Next slide. Just some of the things we're doing, digitisation. So you're probably aware, Telstra's absolutely foot on the accelerator. Digitisation, everything wants to go digital, all digital experiences, and obviously provide the networks and the technologies and so on that others such as RMIT and all sorts of other businesses can do the same. But just to, on the other hand, we do also recognise that not everybody's on that same track and at the same time experience, and so we're doing quite a lot in terms of digital inclusion. The index itself, with RMIT and CSO Swinburne, we have programs in digital literacy among seniors, Indigenous, young people. The Telstra Foundation invests in technology innovation, particularly in the civil society, not-for-profits, code clubs, and so on, and scaling not-for-profits services, particularly mental health services, Reach Out, Origin, and Ask Ezi. We've got a range of products and services for low-income people, and we've done a whole lot of work with mobile broadband SIMs for education departments, and as mentioned, the NCO supported concessional home broadband. We've got customer service specialities in financial hardship, domestic violence, Indigenous, regional and rural, disability, bereavement, and unwanted calls. So digitisation, yes, going ahead, foot on the accelerator, but recognising that we need to bring the Australian community and customers with us. And finally, the last slide. COVID-19 has brought into focus some of the wicked problems with technology and digital inclusion. The need for reliable high-speed data and affordable price is still a real challenge. And again, ongoing NBN pricing challenges to affordability, willingness to pay, not to mention industry investment. The need for better protections against online malware, phishing, scams, addictions, that's quite evident over the last few months. The health balance between physical activity, mindfulness, and virtual interaction needs to be considered. For myself, I've had real problems just sitting here the length of time working from home. It's a problem. Technology is complex or complicated, assumes a great deal of skill. Technology is expensive. You think of all the devices and keeping them up to date and so on. And just to mention, technology is just as important for the creative arts, digital storytelling, all those sorts of things, not just in the STEM sort of environment. So my final word, I suppose, and plea is there's lots of opportunities for digital education, ways of working, but the challenges to effectiveness are not just technological, which is a way of saying that we need to be steamed up about the digital future of STEM education, and the arts play a very important role. Thank you. Thank you, Robert. I think steamed up about STEM is a great line we can probably apply in all kinds of contexts. It sounds quite worthwhile. Next up, we're delighted to have with us Louisa Dale, all the way from the UK, who's got this, again, another fascinating title, Director of Insight at an organisation called JISC, or JISC, at RMIT University. We can hardly complain about other acronyms, but we're very welcome to have with us Louisa, who's going to talk to us about learning and teaching reimagined. So Louisa, over to you.
Thanks very much. So, Learning and Teaching Reimagined. My story today is reflections on a conversation in the UK, not about ifs and buts and maybes, but let's get on with reimagining and redesigning learning and teaching at scale, sector level transformation now. I've spent 20 years working with JISC, if you could move on. We're the UK's lead government college and university funded organisation, Education Technology for tertiary education. We're a bit like RMIT in Australia. We're proud that we support Janet, one of the world's most powerful academic networks. We provide security services in EduRoam, for instance, but we also offer an increasingly large range of shared services, content and software deals for made at a collective level for the UK university and college sector, also data and analytics and student services. It also means I've spent nearly 20 years unsuccessfully making the case for technology enhanced learning and teaching in education and research in readiness for the fourth industrial revolution. 2020, for all its plethora of shortcomings, is something of a watershed moment for learning and teaching, at least in the UK higher education. So in June, we set about working in partnership with a large number of UK sector organisations. We launched Learning and Teaching Reimagined. It's a COVID response programme. Our purpose is to learn from the rapid acceleration to online learning and determine the likely shape of sustained transformation in technology enhanced learning in the UK higher education. Through the programme, we've held three horizons very firmly in our view. Our initial effort was to support peers to learn quickly from the emergency response, recognising absolutely, despite absolute best efforts, this wasn't quality online learning. We've spent some time looking to the far future indeed, which is not a little difficult when university leaders, let's be honest, in this exceptional year find it quite difficult to look to Christmas. And finally, in this very last month of our initiative, and timely, a great opportunity to talk further with you and learn from your experiences, we're beginning to explore with university leaders how they prepare for change to come in the next first few years of digital transformation in learning and teaching, because we are very, very sure, and our advisory board of vice chancellors this week confirmed it as such, that's well within their sights now. So in June and July, we sought to help universities with targeted advice and guidance. We supported peer conversations, at the same time gathering insight on their immediate response and challenges. In all honesty, we didn't cover any real surprises, and what you see here is probably so-so from your perspectives. You've been there, you've responded to it in a similar fashion. I can hear that from today. But our overall impression was that pointed to the fact that there's a collective lack of maturity in technology enhanced learning at scale. There are pockets of expertise and experimentation, but at scale, the UK sector at least is simply not mature in its approach. Sure, we have some online learning providers who excel, Open University is just one, but it remains a clear and central concern to university leaders in the UK that actually, how might they take that next step? And it was immediately clear that despite some of the headlines, student behaviours, if not always their opinions, suggested that they found many things more appealing, the flexibility, online learning opportunities. But it remains the case, and we're currently in field with student research at the moment. We're doing some focus groups to help us with a depth view to understand better, not only online learning, but blended approaches. Students may not be digital natives, but they do require some induction, and arguably that's as much because the systems and the interfaces that we're giving them simply aren't up to scratch from what they experience beyond the education space. We think we'll see a likely demand for high quality multimedia content from students. Their everyday world is media rich with content which is highly targeted and highly appealing, and I've seen some of the conversations on that today. We held around 30 sessions, more likely 50 by the time we conclude at the end of October, engaging somewhere with around about 2,000 people from UK universities, from Vice-Chancellor interviews with staff, students, webinars, roundtables, focus groups, all virtual, all supported by the UK university community, giving their free time freely and openly. In our recent sessions, we've heard many actual issues that we heard from the initial learning to the emergency response. Issues of digital skills and confidence, actually permission to take risks being the real part, aside from an earlier colleague who identified that just plain security leaves people uncomfortable in this environment. Also, appetite for sustained change. It's been an exhausting year, bringing students along as things continue to evolve. Strikingly, in all sessions, leadership was a dominant feature. Participants felt it was either a challenge or clear and visible leadership would make a difference in the next year. Perhaps there's a need and a desire for stronger leadership when we face such an uncertain and unusual new academic year. Some of the participants were certainly missing the usual rituals of coming back fresh to a new academic year and knowing the comfort of knowing what the new year looked like. But we think there's more at play here. So what have you learned? This view reflects our emerging learning on the programme. We're still in play with a number of pieces of research, challenges which you face today, no doubt, but we feel also will sustain and begin, and answering some of these questions will begin to lay the foundations for excellence in technology enhanced learning. As a communications and marketing challenge, heightening the appeal of online or indeed blended learning, not just for its sake, but actually as perceptions of what a university experience shifts. Despite best efforts, there's a very real challenge in digital poverty. Digital exclusion is a very significant feature of concern in the UK. Hard to believe in a problem as it's a problem such in a country that's as wealthy as the UK, but it's very true. We actually have our Office of Students, the regulator, is undertaking a review of online learning at this moment alongside our part and taking very particular attention and notice to digital exclusion. We see the need to improve staff, student and skills, but confidence is repeated, as I said, and it's echoed through the conversations. There's a significant digital issue, and we think perhaps at all levels of the university. Scaling of technology enhanced learning is an issue. It's a central concern. It takes time and expertise, but there's strong appeal in and interest in blended learning, not simply for now, but for the future. But no one wants technology as leading. It's the pedagogy, it's expertise, it's learning design and learning outcomes that take primacy. So there's huge desire for transformation, but without confidence that requires leadership. And as we're acutely aware, not a little effort to nurture a supportive culture, which you so clearly have at RMIT. So something for me to take away here today. But as you know all too well, this kind of transformative change on an individual institutional level, but also at a sector level for the UK, will not come easily or cheaply. And that's very much within our sights and our ambition. So in our final report, we will contend that the university needs to be a much more seamless experience, allowing students to move much more fluidly through digital and physical spaces. I have a next session this morning with estates directors, talking to them about the implications of that. They've got a lot to help us with to understand how we might improve and shape and reshape the experience of students for those that want to pursue this transformation. Once it becomes clear, we feel, that universities can offer a blended or online experience, we expect student expectations to continue to rise. It won't be clear to them why the seamless experience that they experience beyond university isn't something that they are experiencing on campus or in that blended situation. This slide just highlights something that we've been in consultation with over the past month. We've looked at to understand, really get to grips with what might challenge, what might make the most impact for colleagues working in universities in 2021 to help inform their investment and their planning for the coming year ahead. We've had some really fantastic engagement here. Strikingly, the vast majority are expecting to continue with blended learning, whether or not COVID applies. They see the opportunity and the need to be more resilient in the mode of delivery of education. But also, actually, there's huge appeal, they're not ready for it yet, in adopting student-led approaches, and that's given us plenty to work with. And that's aspirations not just from those that are working in technology-related roles, that's absolutely coming from those in quality, in leadership in the learning and teaching spaces, which is really heartening. So right now we're developing a vision and some guiding principles for university leaders, supported by a range of resources of visions of the future, pathways and guidance to help those who are just getting started with technology. And there are many in universities, many in leadership and middle management roles. And we're trying to equip them, if not with the technical understanding, with an understanding about what is possible. And finally, we're developing a strategic framework, a range of resources to help guide conversations, strategic planning and investment. If we just come to the final slide, we want to support our sector through learning and teaching, the major transformation of learning and teaching in higher education. I guess we think the future's already here in the UK. We're getting ready and equipped for whatever lies ahead. If you'd like to learn more about what to expect from UK universities, watch our final report, which will be released on Wednesday, the 4th of November. And thank you for your attention. Back to you, James.
Thank you, Louisa. It seems that the same issues we have in Australia are repeated in the UK. Surprise, surprise. So I think that report will be quite interesting to read when it comes out. Next up, we have David Kellerman, who's a senior lecturer in the School of Mechanical and Manufacturing Engineering at UNSW up in Sydney. Fascinating to hear what David's got to say about starting over an integrated strategy for education 4.0. So David, over to you.
Hello, everyone. I think maybe we're running a little late, so I'm going to go super fast. Hopefully what everybody is seeing is my screen here now. And I want to run you through a whole lot of stuff based on my talk, which is starting over an integrated strategy for Education 4.0. Now, I called it Education 4.0 because I couldn't put all of the words into the title, you know, AI, bots, personalized learning, at-risk students, learning communities, all of these different things. I'm just wrapping them up into one word. But the thing I really want to talk about is this incumbent system of the learning management system, right? This is our learning management system, Moodle. Here's a whole bunch of PDFs. Here's a whole bunch of lecture recordings. And I know that lots of educators are doing really great things, but the average lowest common denominator of a Moodle page or a Canvas page or a Blackboard page is still really documents and monolithic video recordings. And so I've got this idea that it's kind of like a really old rundown building where at some point you just go, you know what, knock it down. It's not worth it. And so what I'm going to show you today is how I teach a class without using my learning management system at all. And I'm not telling you to buy new software. In fact, we're talking at RMIT right now through Teams, and I'm going to use nothing more than Office 365, which you already have, and I'll show you how I teach my classes. So my project is to build a collaborative project for learning and make online better than on campus has ever been before. Now, I'm standing here in front of this big screen. You'll notice I'm going to do a few tricky things today. One thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to share the chat. So if you want to post a question, it might even just come up here in real time. And I'm going to do some other interesting things, like whenever I get to a particular slide like this, I might just screen share and change over to the camera. Now, this is actually the system that I use to teach my own classes, and I'm kind of using this as a demonstration so you can effectively be part of the classroom. So I'm going to go through really fast because I've got a lot of content, and then Rita kind of threw me under the bus. She's like, David's going to tell you about Qbot. So I quickly added all of these extra slides back into my presentation. I wasn't going to talk about it, but I will instead. I'll run you through how I use Teams. So Teams, of course, we can chat, we can communicate, we can do code snippets. And I started doing this back in 2017. I was the first person in higher education to teach with Teams. Now, I use channels. I pin things like my lecture slides as tabs. All of the content is really nicely organized for the students to be able to get to. It's very simple for them. And they take photographs of things, they post it. I do live inking on this big screen here that I'm showing you right now during class, and I'll give you a demo of that. They're co-owners of that in the digital space, which is OneNote Class Notebook. Now, I was using live events, which we're using right now, to broadcast my lectures on campus. Of course, I'm not doing that this year due to COVID. I do assignments through Teams Assignments, which is actually a SharePoint document. You have the entire version history of what your students have done. I pin great software as tabs like MATLAB Online. We don't need to go into the computer lab anymore. And I build these SharePoint pages that are really reminiscent of that classic kind of homepage landing page that you get on a learning management system, except these are the actual documents living here in SharePoint. They're live and I can edit them. I don't have to download and upload. Now, I'm using Power Apps these days. My TAs walk into the class with an app on their phone and they actually get feedback directly when they're in front of the student that shows them if the student has been struggling, and it's a moment for them to be able to reach out and connect. I also use this app called Insights. Now, this is a push button deploy data analytics system for Teams. And basically the numbers that I'm getting back is that I'm getting over 10 times the engagement. Now, I'm at the end of week 3 now with my class at UNSW, and I'm getting close to 3,000 student posts already in the classroom. We are having astronomical levels of engagement. And this is really typical of a modern platform like Teams. So I also created a self-learning bot. Some of you may know about QuestionBot. QuestionBot essentially trains itself based on the question and answer pairs of the students. And then when a student asks a similar question, it can answer it directly, but it actually redirects them to the previous conversation. And this is a community building bot that's designed to connect students back together. Now, I just saw a question here coming from Rita there, and she's answering the questions in the chat, which is great. And I can encourage people to post in the chat because I actually have a laptop right here where I watch the student chat coming in as I teach, and I'm watching your Q&A come in right now. So my bot does some crazy things, right? Like it's got this vision API, and my students normally have these workbooks where they do problems, and it's engineering. So they take photos of what they're doing, and the bot can read the QR codes and say, hey, I see you're working on this particular question, and put that into its knowledge base. So the bot can search video recordings automatically. You can say, hey, does anyone know what Newton's first law is? And it can give you a link to the video recording at the exact second where I talk about that using modern APIs. So I end up with 10,000 student posts, and the bot is essentially taking the aggregation of all of that information and it's using it to return benefit and create material for the students. So remember that lecture that I was showing you before, I do really cool stuff with augmented reality and with the Azure Connect camera. So we actually have this equipment in the laboratory, and in real time, I'm able to scan that piece of equipment, be in a lecture, maybe I'm doing a problem inside the class. So I'm doing a calculation, we're predicting when a particular piece of material is going to fail in the lab. And I say, let's cross over to the lab. We're running this experiment right now in real time. And boom, I've dropped the piece of machinery that's running in the lab in real time on the floor of the lecture theatre. Now I have live dashboards using Power BI, no new software here, and I've got a huge amount of analytics that I use to predict the student outcomes. And I use that to generate personalized study packs for every single student. It gets uploaded to SharePoint, one click, and they see their personal study pack. So this is a true tailored learning experience. It's analytics driven, and it's all running on Azure Cloud, .NET, SharePoint, and Teams. It's a completely native single system that you already own along with most universities in the world. So everything I do, right, it's live, it's collaborative, creative. It's not canned content like watch this video. It's let's create this video together live in real time. But there were 5 things that I still relied on campus for: lecture theatres, tutorials, laboratories, a study day that I run before the exam and the final exams. And I'm going to go really quickly through each one of those and show you how I replaced that experience. So join me now very quickly. You're now in the lobby. You're waiting for the lecture to start. And I say, good morning, everyone. Welcome. It is week 8. We're going to be working on beam deflection. You're going to notice cool stuff like the colors of the lights are changing in time with the screen here. I've turned the Harbour Bridge into a digital model. I'm morphing it in 3D. I've got some mathematics here that I need to solve. Now, once I do this, I need to start doing some inking. So maybe I'm doing 0 to 2 pi x squared. I'm doing this calculation. I click a button in my left hand, and now all of a sudden I'm doing a direct screen share from this screen, and you're getting exactly the feed. You're getting my camera and you're getting the chat right now. And we get on and we're going to go a bit more in detail, and we're going to do a worked example. So I tap this little, link at the bottom. It takes me straight to the class notebook for that particular worked example. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start inking this problem live. All of my students own this. It is uploading in real time. And as I do all of this inking, you can see I can go to draw. I can do some inking here with my pen in real time, and we can basically solve these problems live, like for example, using a digital ruler to work out where the tangent of this is. And as we do these problems, you really start to appreciate what the benefit is of having this kind of real-time system, because I can have this diagram I've drawn behind me and I can talk about an actual beam, about where the loading is going to occur, where that deflection is coming in the context of this screen. I can gesture with this material. I can be interactive with it while being interactive with it with you. But as I'm doing a problem like this, you might notice I'm standing here and you're looking at my back. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to switch over to a different camera angle, and well, for some reason or other, okay, there's my camera here. That's going to replace this main camera that I'm using instead. So we get to the end and you go, okay, well, what about the laboratory that we did this in? That is going to be one of my next points. So I'm going to run back along here. We're summarizing. We're at the end of our lecture, and I say, join me next week. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is tutorials. Now, tutorials, I'm now running a hybrid model where what's actually happening in the class is being broadcast to the web. There is one tutor that is online. There's one tutor in the room, and we are actually combining the distance and the students that are on campus together in a single experience. This gives us flexibility to adapt. If there's an outbreak in COVID, the students can just not show up that week and everything is covered. The second one is
David, I hate to interrupt, but we're about 1 minute over the 10 minutes already.
Okay,
so
sure thing. So yeah. I'm very close. I'm going to finish up as quick as I can.
Sure, no drama.
Laboratories here, one thing that I will show you is that I can actually jump over to Teams here, and I've got my lab actually running right here inside Teams. And so this is a full 3-dimensional environment here that the students can go and interact with the laboratory in 3D. And again, this is running natively inside of Teams. So finally, what I want to talk about is the study day. Similar to one of our previous presenters, I used Flipgrid to get students to co-generate all of the material, start mini lessons, and the final exam hall, which was replaced by not a digital exam here, but actually written on paper, run in SharePoint with an open chat system. The students upload their exam using Office Lens. They take a photo, and then I actually train machine learning to automatically mark hand-drawn diagram. So what you can see here is that's Azure Machine Learning analyzing a hand-drawn diagram. Now, it's a lot of material, I know, and I'm really rushing through because there's so much to talk about here in 10 minutes, but my final exam gave the same histogram as the one that was run on campus. So essentially what I'm talking about is how can we teach more students? How can we make online better than it's ever been? And how can we make sure that every student is benefiting from the presence of all of the other students and use artificial intelligence to enhance that experience? So addendum, I got 100.0% satisfaction for that course. Addendum 2, the software I made is open source and it is on GitHub. You can go and get it right now. What do I think about all of this? Let's rebuild from scratch. I don't need learning management systems anymore. They're yesteryear's technology. And I just want to demonstrate to people that we can take a new step into the way that we run education online. So thank you everybody for listening.
Thank you, David. There's certainly a lot there, and you certainly ended the highlight with the exam thing there. I think that's something that cuts close to a lot of our hearts. So that's a fascinating thing. And like most speakers, I think we could probably have an hour from you and still get still not take the end of all. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I could talk for 10 minutes just on the open exams, but I just want to show the breadth of things that we can do online using a single platform today.
Indeed, there's certainly a lot more there. I think we can look at. Thank you. Now, thank you, everybody. That brings us to our panel discussion. As we know, we've had lots of great interaction in the chat. There's been people asking and answering questions. That's all great. So what we're going to move to now, for the next 10 minutes or so, we might go a little beyond the scheduled finishing time of 9 minutes from now, if there's sufficient questions and the session kept going. So I'd just like to get all of our speakers to get ready to answer questions. We have several in the chat that we're looking at to fire at you here. So if you do have further questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. The chances are we won't get them through all of them in whatever time we have available today, but we will endeavour to answer them offline, either via email or via the chat or some other means as we get time afterwards. One question I think has been voted up, that I can see anyway, is that as a popular one, is one that often comes up in discussions that have this year. It's about the value of online classes. The particular question asks, if lectures are provided online with no in-person lectures under non-pandemic settings, how come students are charged the same amount of fees? There's a bit more in that, but I guess the general theme there is about what's the value of online education, both perceived and otherwise, compared to the traditional face-to-face. Because it's certainly no stranger to any academic to have that student ask the question, if I'm not getting face-to-face service, why am I paying face-to-face level fees? So would any of our panel like to have a crack at answering that? Why should we pay the same rates for online, or should we pay the same rates for online classes as face-to-face?
Well, I don't know. There's a lot of people working online and still getting paid, so I don't see the difference. Anyone else want to have a go?
Well, I'm going to just say, I'm going to jump in there really quickly, which is I've just shown everybody a whole bunch of setups that are actually better than sitting in a lecture theatre. When we go in a lecture theatre, we're thinking, oh, look, I'm sitting in this beautiful, expensive building in this expensive campus. We have to think more about how we return the value to students in the online environment. You know, sitting down in front of your $20 webcam, instead of standing in that $400,000 lecture theatre, is not returning value. And so one of my thoughts here is that we don't need to think about, should we make it cheaper? We should say, how do we return value online?
Mm-hmm.
I'd just like to come in on that. It might well be a short-term problem, right? So in a UK university, first-year students who have been inducted digitally are loving it. It's more comfortable, it's less threatening, whatever. They're second-year students, third-year students, same university, want to go back to campus. And why is that? Because what they were sold from the outset, what they expected, was to be physically on campus. The students coming in expect online. So we think blended is an opportunity, and we don't think it's online will be for all to sustain, but a blended approach. It's about shifting the expectations, and we might have work to do in the short term for sure to highlight and accentuate the positives, but we think very quickly students will see the benefits of flexibility and blended learning, and it will become a non-problem. Let's hope that occurs.
Can I just chime in there as well? I use a lot of these blended learning approaches and do have my lectures separately online. And I can tell you from 2017, where I ran my classes in a very traditional format, where I stood there for 2 hours speaking, I've been able to now in this blended mode actually deliver more teaching content, because I can put that stuff, that fundamental things that students can listen to in their own time online, but use that 2 hours that I have with students in such a meaningful way. I do a lot more activities and workshop-based tasks than ever before, because I'm setting them up to do the lectures in their own time as their homework. Whereas originally I'd send them off to do tutorial tasks just for them to come back in and us to do a question answer session. That was boring and not getting us anywhere. So don't tell my students this, but they actually get 12 hours more content and activity time with me with the models that we currently use.
Anyone else want to chime in with that one? I think you probably hit the nail on the head there, Jess. It's not just about what we do, but showing students the value of that. And I think it's often about perceived value rather than actual value. But I think that's part of that message to get across.
That's right. And I think with the COVID situation as well, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes when it comes to giving you alternative assessments and alternative resources. So there's lots happening that you might not necessarily see, but every academic I know has just worked just as hard, I'd say leagues harder this year than they ever have previously, to try to get that same learning experience to you in this online format.
Assuming there's no more responses to that one, another question that's been asked, I guess, goes directly to the sort of setup that David was talking about, is that what university support is there cost in setting things up with screens and cameras and equipment and so forth? And is that something we can expect university support every lecture with, if available, in the future? Is that something, would that be a shifting of some of that infrastructure costs, for example? So, David, do you want to have a go at that one?
Yeah, so this is a really great question. Let's think about all of these lecture theatres that are sitting there empty, using incredibly high value floor space on campuses. They've cost a massive amount of money to build. We've shifted online, as we saw from the analysis. We're going to say, well, are we ever going to go back to the traditional way now that we have these offerings? We want to utilize the campus space better. We want to make maker spaces and have things that are going on. And a lecture studio like this can fit in a 3 metre by 3 metre huddle room. Now, there's about $35,000 of stuff here, and you go, that's a lot of money. It's not a lot of money compared to a lecture theatre. So we can take a $300,000 lecture theatre, replace it with 10 $30,000 lecture studios in the same footprint, then demolish all of the other lecture theatres and build maker spaces, community spaces. I think this is the direction where we can look at this as being an opportunity for a value add.
Others got things to add? Rita, you look like you're about to speak, or is that just me misinterpreting your video?
No, I think these alternative ways of collaborating are so real, and I know RMIT, you know, your design was a lot about that. Like, you got rid of your lectures and created these places where people could collaborate and come and talk, because that's the real learning that often people are trying to achieve is, you know, how do I behave in a group, and that is part of that lifelong learning, I suppose. And also about bringing in some of these immersive experiences as well, because that's part of that. But I see that David's put his Qbot up on the screen. Are you going to show us that?
No, I wasn't going to.
I guess we can show it offline if need be, of that sort of things, but it's great to see that sort of technology at work. Any further comments on infrastructure? I think that also links in a bit what Robert was saying, is that we're also assuming that students have, well, to be cynical, a very middle class access to technology and broadband and computing and so forth. I think, is that a concern to say, if we're having all of these increased technological dependence, does that mean we're also increasing, perhaps by default, some exclusivity by disenfranchising some of the people who are not as well connected as others? That's one of the things about Robert's talk, was saying there's probably a larger proportion of the population that are not online. I know as a long-time academic, we often hear that students are always on their mobiles. They've got a laptop, they've got a mobile phone, they've got a tablet, they've got this, but the reality may be a little different, and not every student has free and easy access to all of the infrastructure and technology that we often assume.
Well, I don't know, if they're studying a STEM subject, they'd have to have a computer and they'd have to be on the internet. I don't know, I find it really hard. Does anybody, I mean, I don't work with students every day, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask, but perhaps someone else on the panel.
I'm just going to say I'm pretty big on equity. Now, I assume my students have got a phone with an internet connection, and it's all they need to do the course. So my final exam is written on paper. I post these all over the world. It's got an exam sheet, it's got a QR code, and they write their final exam on this and they take a photo with their phone. So I don't assume that they have a printer. I don't assume that they have broadband at home. I don't assume that they've got a computer to themselves. All they need is a phone and to be able to join a Wi-Fi at Starbucks.
Mm-hmm.
We, at least in the UK, it's likely, we've been in discussion with government and some of our devolved nations too. We think we're going to need to make interventions. There have been interventions in Ireland to provide kit. We don't assume, unfortunately, we can't assume that all of our students, at least in the UK, have access to a mobile phone. And if they do, they often don't have sufficient data. So we're likely to see over winter and spring, we hope, depending on the economy, some specific interventions. We certainly are encouraging universities not to make assumptions and actually to recognise there will be differences between requirements between courses, and that's another barrier to those who are already finding it a difficult reach to get into UK universities. So it's something that needs very particular attention, and so our encouragement is to look at it not only from a course perspective, but look at it from an institutional perspective.
Mm. I do note we're about 1 minute past our scheduling finishing time, so with your indulgence, we might go on for a few minutes more, but not too much longer, so we don't overstay our welcome too much. I think there's one more question, at least, that we might get to from that's been asked in the chat, which is along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing here, to say, with a lot of online learning, some of us are talking about chunking things into smaller amounts that are more easily digestible. Does that create an appetite for, let's call it clickbait learning, rather than the more holistic traditional model of assembling arguments and bigger picture and conceptual analysis? So if you like, does being online, has that in some way fundamentally changed the way we do education into soundbite, clickbait sort of levels, rather than the more traditional values of reading an entire book and be able to conceptualise and theorise based on some gained knowledge?
In my experiences, no, I chunk material and pre-record material for the most part that is fundamental knowledge. So, for example, I run a week where I talk about chemicals in the environment, and I can talk about some of the key definitions that students need to know to understand that content and get that across in the pre-recorded contents. But in class, and when we do then have that workshop time, and the workshop time is what I've freed up by putting that lecture and those that pre-recorded stuff online, I can bring in some hot topics. And for this year, it was about how the flame retardants that were used in the bushfires might have an effect on our organic produce. So you can bring sort of the current topics and have those discussions into the classes, because you've popped the stuff that the students really don't need you just standing in front of them talking about online. I'd rather that stuff be done in a person's own time and use that time in class more meaningfully.
Maybe I go another step there, which is I don't even make pre-recorded content. I just say there's probably a good version of it on YouTube, and I've got a wiki here, and I tell the students, just if you find a good video that's explaining this, just share it on YouTube and everybody can watch it. If I'm going to make any content whatsoever, it's going to be live in real time, and it's a conversation and it's a reaction. So I create zero pre-recorded and pre-made content.
Do you have a lot of videos on YouTube though, or are they other people's videos?
No, they're not mine, they're other people's. Khan Academy, whatever, there's a whole world out there. Let's embrace the web, you know? And I think people are going to have amazing videos that are made with 3D graphics and high-level production, and we should just be embracing the content that already exists. Every moment we have the students' attention, it should be two-way. We should be talking to each other, you know. And I'm not going to post some long, boring video and say, oh, you've got to watch this. If you need to learn more about it, you've got the ability to go and find a video, and if you find a great one, share it.
I think it's an interesting point there, David, probably a great place to finish up given the timing, is to say we should be talking to each other. And I think that's probably a good summary of a lot of the things we've talked about. We've got the technology to bring us to talk to their more interesting ways, but I think that probably gets back to the original notion of university as a working community that I think you've summed up very well. I say we should talk to our students and talk to each other rather than have pre-recorded kinds of things. So look, we are 5 minutes or so past our scheduled finishing time. So I think, much against my inclination to keep talking, because I think there's a lot of fascinating things we could discuss here with this great panel of people, I think we probably should bring this at least formally to a close. If we haven't got to your particular question that's been asked, my apologies. We will endeavour to answer all the questions in the chat. If not answered live today, we will get back to you later by email or some other process to get these particular questions answered. We do have some acknowledgements and thanks for the event today. I'd like to personally thank Mark Sanderson and Magda Babansky for the development of this particular event. Our backstage crew, Sarah Lathrop-Murray and Jeff Frazina, who've done a wonderful job in keeping this live event running and working all the way through. Michelle Nicolo, who's done an enormous power of work in organising both today and earlier and contacting people and various other things. So thank you to Michelle particularly. If there's a way to give a virtual bouquet of flowers, I've yet to discover it, but if I would, I'd give it to you right now. Thank you to all our speakers, Margaret, Alex, Mark, Jess, Nick, Sophie, Rita, Robert, Louisa and David. All been fascinating. We probably could have an hour from each of you and not plumb the depths of what we've got. So thank you very much for your contributions. And thank you for all attendees. We had something over 300 register. We've had, I don't know how many asking questions in the chat. It's been a very stimulating event, and certainly there's a lot more food for thought here in various different aspects. One thought that Margaret Jollins and I had was this could well become the first of a series of events if there's interest in that. So we'll be following up with you later to see if there's any interest in future events like this. But I think if this one's any to go on, we could probably get these same bunch of people back and get them talking again for 4 hours on end and probably not end up boring anyone with all the things we have to say. So thank you, everyone. Apologies for running late, and wherever you are, enjoy the rest of your day, evening, morning, whatever it may be. Thank you, and that's all from us.